It's hard to find a game with the same kind of influence as Doom, and for good reason. It's 25 years old now, but in 1993 it set a benchmark, and not just for what PC hardware was capable of, but for video games in general. Doom raised the bar in a variety of ways, and it kicked a ton of ass doing it. Of course, this isn't news to anyone who's ever actually played the game, but if you haven't, here's what you've been missing. Now, its reputation does precede it, and most people already get the basic story. You play a lone, nameless space marine man, and you basically fight all the bad guys until they die. But what you might not know about are Doom's various cheat codes and developer tools. Some of them have actually had a huge impact on the industry by popularizing speedrunning and even defining some of the gaming lexicons still used today, and that's why I'm here. Codex is a series that documents the effects of cheat codes in classic video games, but also talks about who coded them and why, and what effect they've had on the industry or just the culture of gaming. Based on this, Doom is certainly a good place to start, but I'm gonna have to explain some pretty important stuff as we go along. Don't worry, I'll be brief. So chances are, if you've recently played Doom, you've probably played it through Steam on a Windows PC. But 25 years ago, we had Microsoft DOS. This disk operating system was entirely text-based, and commands were issued using only the command line. So to run an application, let's say Doom from 1993, you would first have to manually navigate to the directory or folder that the game is in. In order to find the game files, you would then type dir for directory, and then look for the right file name. Type said file name, which in this case would just be doom.exe, hit enter, and you're good to go. Games from this era are still playable this way through applications like DOSBox, and DOS itself actually still plays a role in Windows today. It's just been renamed to Command Prompt. Anyway, for this video I'm mostly going to be talking about the Ultimate Doom, released in 1995. So as you can see, I've typed something at the end of the file name here. This is our first example of a developer tool, used by appending this command line parameter to the game's file name. So by itself, devparm doesn't do a whole lot. But while enabled, a frame rate meter is displayed on the bottom left. The more white dots are visible, the more labored the rendering process is, so on slower computers this will indicate a need to optimize graphics settings or to upgrade hardware entirely. Another feature of the devparm command is the ability to take screenshots, which was pretty cool for back in the day. Custom content creators, called modders, would use this to share examples of their work, highlight bugs, or just show off the game in general. Moving right along though, typing episode followed by 1 through 4 will immediately start a new game at the first level of the specified episode. So a lot of PC games in the 1990s followed this episodic structure. The first episode would be released completely free to distribute, called shareware, but the remaining episodes would have to be bought, often by check or money order. The warp parameter works similarly to episode, but it starts the game at a specific level instead. Each episode of Doom only has 9 levels, with the 8th being a boss fight and the 9th being a secret level. So to start a game at, let's say, the boss of episode 2, you would type warp 2 space 8. Oh right, and warping to a new level also resets your status and your inventory. So yeah. This parameter is actually required for a few others as well, like fast, which makes enemies attack and move more quickly, and no monsters, which, like the name implies, removes all enemies from the game. So this is pretty basic stuff so far, but here's where things get a little interesting. Before Doom came along, there were really only a handful of multiplayer first-person games, and none of them were truly online. In 1993, public internet had barely gotten off the ground, so instead, these games would use a local area network, like a daisy chain of PCs linked together. Some games also used modem connectivity, but this was really just to facilitate a direct link between two computers using a telephone line. Doom was no different. In fact, it actually used both of these connection methods to their respective advantages. A modem connection between two computers was the method of choice for cooperative play. The other mode, however, was kind of like a different game altogether. It ran through local networking with no host required, and it had support for up to 4 players. This mode was enabled by using the deathmatch parameter. Deathmatch kickstarted the era of LAN parties, and it created an entirely new avenue for gaming that didn't previously exist. Okay, it had technically been done before, but never with this level of fidelity, or with such an emphasis on fine motor skills. And this brings us to the next major breakthrough that can be attributed to Doom. Saving screenshots opened the door for sharing content online, but what about saving video? What if you could, say, record your best speedrun and share that online instead? Well, with the record parameter, you can do just that. However, instead of capturing the whole screen and saving it as a huge video file, record only captures the player's button presses during gameplay. These recorded files can then be replayed in real time by using the play demo parameter. Known as demos, these files were as easy to share as screenshots and launched speedrunning into the mainstream gaming scene of the day. Not only that, but entire deathmatch games could be saved, as the record parameter captures the movement and actions of all players involved. Without going into too much detail, the file parameter was essential for the modding scene, which included custom maps, content replacement, and total conversion mods. Doom has contributed a pretty staggering amount to the gaming industry, especially considering when it was released. Even parameters like left and right were way ahead of their time, using networked computers to create a multi-screen experience. Considering the lead programmer of Doom, John Carmack, is now a chief technical officer at Oculus, these commands give an interesting perspective. Now, there are a few more basic parameters that I won't be covering here, but absolutely feel free to check out the links in the description. As for the in-game cheats, let's do a quick rundown on how these actually work. Cheat codes are activated by typing in specific words during gameplay. For example, one of the most well-known cheat codes in this game, if not of all time, is activated by typing ID DQD. ID for id Software, and the DQD we'll get back to in a minute. This otherwise unassuming command has become a staple of video game culture, spawning a ton of related media, some questionable life choices, and popular gamers who have taken on the cheat code as their persona. In any case, typing IDDQD will enable God mode, meaning you can't be harmed. The game also presents you with a message saying degreelessness mode on. This odd statement has confused more than a few players, myself included. Actually, playing this when I was a kid, I always read it as digresslessness. Something I'm thankfully not alone in doing. So to understand what this word means, we'll have to take a look at the man responsible for making these cheat codes in the first place. Dave Taylor joined id Software fresh out of college, working alongside lead developers John Carmack and John Romero. He's known for programming some pretty important parts of Doom, like the status bar, the automap system, which maps out levels as you explore them, and even the same screen melting transition that I emulated in the intro of this video. That's a pretty big deal, especially considering Taylor could really only playtest the game for short periods of time. After a little while, he'd start sweating, feeling nauseous, and would sometimes have to lie down. These are all symptoms of what is now known as simulation sickness, and Taylor suffered from it through the entire development process. Fortunately, playing many rounds of deathmatch with his coworkers actually helped him build a decent tolerance to these effects. Getting back to the degreelessness message, the term comes from a sort of joke fraternity that Taylor and two of his colleagues made up while they were in university. Each of them had, at one point, persuaded the professor of a class they were failing in to not give them an F, but allow them to quit the class instead, resulting in a Q on their transcript. The name of this informal frat was Delta Quit Delta, or DQD. And because receiving a Q effectively meant temporary invulnerability from having a failing grade on their GPA, typing IDDQD in Doom also gives you invulnerability. If for some reason being invincible isn't enough for you, simply punch in IDFA for full weapons, maxed out ammunition, and armor. There's a bit of debate as to what the acronym IDFA actually means. The generally accepted answers are ID full ammo and ID firearms and armor. Likewise, ID KFA gives you keys, firearms, and armor, allowing you to open any locked door in a particular level. But according to the man who created the cheat code, KFA actually stands for Killer Fucking Ammo, which makes sense considering the most powerful weapon in the game is called the Big Fucking Gun. ID MYPOS, or MyPOS, displays the player's X, Y, and Z coordinates on screen. ID CLEV changes the level to whatever map is specified. Much like the warp parameter, this cheat requires the episode and map number for Doom, so ID CLEV15 will take you to the 5th level of episode 1. Typing IDB hold followed by a specific letter will give you a corresponding temporary power-up. So, for example, ID Behold R will give you a radiation suit. I will give you partial invisibility. V will give you invulnerability. A will give you a full area map of the level. L will light up all dark areas around you. And S will give you the best power-up of them all, Berserk. Oh yeah, ever wanted to pull a chainsaw out of nowhere? Well, typing ID Choppers will do just that. This is another cheat code that displays an interesting message when you type it. This time it says, "Doesn't suck, GM." According to Taylor, this is a reference to his friend Guy Mahor and his indie game Choppers that was developed for a statewide programming contest sometime earlier. As for the "doesn't suck" message, well, apparently Mahor was a little sensitive about his game not being completely finished for the contest, so Taylor immortalized his friend in Doom and got people curious about his game. Typing IDDT doesn't appear to do anything at first, but it actually makes the entire automap visible. Type it again and you will now see all objects and enemies on the map as well. The player symbol will also change to an arrow with the letters DDT, David D. Taylor. The last cheat code we'll look at is also one of Doom's most infamous. Walking through walls is a pretty standard cheat in modern gaming, but it was Doom that popularized the term no-clipping. John Carmack, who designed the game's engine, defined its collision detection as clipping a movement vector. For example, when you walk into a wall and get stopped, your movement vector is being clipped. No-clipping disables that collision and allows you to pass through any surface unhindered. But what makes the no-clipping code in Doom so interesting is what you have to type in order to use it. ID SPIS POPD. And we will unpack that whole story in just a sec. So typing this in and enabling no-clip mode will remove all boundary checking from the player, letting you simply walk through doors, troublesome enemies, or the whole level itself. However, leaving the outer boundaries of the map will result in some interesting visuals. Notice how the floors and ceilings of every room are still visible as if they just go on forever. Not only that, but anything that isn't being actively rendered on screen appears to just repeat itself from the last frame that it was rendered, and this is called a Hall of Mirrors effect. This happens because the game engine doesn't expect you to be out of bounds, so it doesn't waste any memory rendering some outside walls. Getting back to the SPIS POPD story, fans of id Software were anticipating the release of Doom for months. Online news groups were a really good way for them to keep in touch and share any new information that they could get. Unfortunately, kind of like with Reddit today, after the early hype followed tons of duplicate posts, all asking where to get Doom, when it was coming out. One user got fed up and jokingly wrote that id Software should title their next game something long and complicated, and maybe this would stop so many people asking the same questions. His suggestion? Smashing pumpkins into small piles of putrid debris. SPIS POPD. The post exploded, attracting tons of attention and spinning off into a whole metagame about what features in a game like SPIS POPD might have. This led to David Taylor himself getting in on the fun, and including the reference in Doom as a cheat code. For the next few years, more and more fans would discover the reference and its meaning. The band Smashing Pumpkins even acknowledged this, sampling some audio from Doom in their 1995 album, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. So that's pretty much it for the cheat codes, but if you're interested in what Taylor's been up to since working on Doom, well, I'll let him tell you.
I've done a real mix of things since id. While I was at id, I invested in this company called Crack.com. We made a game called Abuse, but I was still programming at id, so that's a little confusing. And I actually left right before the Q-Test stuff shipped on Quake, and my Cody bits were basically done. I am sitting on several advisory boards. I tend to be a very active member. I help with business strategy and networking and raising money and sometimes recruiting and stuff like that. But I only do one coding thing at a time. And right now I'm working on a big, ambitious sort of VR adventure. It's a game, but I can't say more about it right now. It tends to be sort of VR and automation as kind of the geeky daytime coding job, and then sideline stuff of just helping people with biz strategy stuff.
And that just about does it for this episode. Hopefully you learned something new about this legendary franchise, and if you want to support the series, all you have to do is subscribe. But keeping in theme with the shareware model I described earlier, if you want to watch the full interview, you can check out the Patreon page in the video description. I also recommend taking a look at Masters of Doom, written by David Kushner. Don't worry, this isn't an audiobook ad. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if there are any games that you'd like me to take a look at, just drop a comment on the video. Until next time, my name's Kyle, and this has been Codex.